We'd like to begin by acknowledging that in Minnesota, we are standing on the rightful homelands of the Dakota, Anishinaabe nations, and other indigenous peoples. We recognize that the U.S. did not uphold its end of the land treaties, and it is the continued displacement of indigenous peoples that allows the state of Minnesota to exist today. We also want to affirm the commitment of ICI to address systemic racism, ableism, and all other inequalities and forms of oppression to ensure inclusive communities. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Edie Cusack, our presenter today. Edie joined the College of Charleston in 2010 and established a 4-year, fully inclusive post-secondary education initiative on campus. She has 13 years of experience and results as the director of REACH to share. Before joining the College of Charleston, she taught in public schools for over 20 years in South Carolina and New Jersey. She has also worked in many advocacy groups across the state of South Carolina to improve student access to education, independence, and equal opportunity. And now I will turn it over to Edie. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm gonna share my screen with you. All right, can someone verify that you can see my PowerPoint for me?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, well, I'm Edie Cusack. Like Liz said, I'm very excited to be with you. I had the incredible opportunity to start an inclusive post-secondary program for students with intellectual disabilities at the College of Charleston about 13 years ago. I retired from the state, so I'm no longer in that position, but I love my time at the college, and I love continuing to work with organizations to advance the field of post-secondary education for these students. I also worked with about 5 or 6 states working to develop new programs. I've worked with universities in 3 different countries, so I've had an incredible opportunity to work with so many different folks in making these programs possible. I know that we have a wide variety of folks that are joining us today. I'm really excited to see some familiar names of some folks I haven't talked to in a little while. So thanks for having me. I'm going to try to address the needs of everybody through my talk today. I know that we have people that are looking at starting programs, people that are working in programs that already exist. We also have some parents and students that are trying to figure out what do they need to do in order to be prepared for programs. So I'm going to do the best I can to meet everybody's needs today. So please feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and I will get to as many as I can. And if not, I am providing my contact information at the end. If anybody has questions, they can reach out to me. So let's get started. So why college? What's pretty cool is that Think College has been collecting data for, goodness, 15 years now. So we know that students that have intellectual disabilities have the same benefits of going to college that traditional students have. The impact on these students is incredible, and the data shows it. So now we don't really have to fight that fight anymore as to why is college an option. The proof is in the pudding, as they say. We know why college should be an option, because it has an incredibly impactful change on students' lives, not only for students that are registered in these programs, but also the traditional students that are attending college alongside these students. An example of the outcomes are the outcomes from the program that I was running. We had a 90% full-time living wage employment rate. So we're not talking about just having a job for an hour to call you employed. We're talking about the type of employment that makes people qualified to have jobs so that they have the financial ability to support themselves and live those self-determined lives that everybody wants. The program that I ran, we had up to a 76% independent living rate, where folks are able to make decisions about where they live and who they live with. Those are the sorts of questions that really add to quality of life, instead of all of those decisions being made for you. Students have the opportunity to learn how to live on their own. They learn the skills that are necessary to live independently and to be actively involved in their communities in the way that they want to be an advocate if they choose, and to not be an advocate if they choose, to participate in social activities that they like, or to be a home buddy if they want, because everybody is different. And to have the skills, to learn the skills necessary to live where you want, work where you want, and to live independently, and to be involved in the community in the way that you choose is really what we're after. So that is why college. Why college? The answer is because the outcomes level the playing field so students with disabilities have the same access as students that do not. So if you're starting a program, one of the things that's really important is to make sure that you're getting the layers of approval that you need to start it, but also those layers of support that are going to come in really helpful, not only to run your program, but to maintain your program, because you always want to be building a program that is part of a university. You don't want to build a program that is person specific, that is all on the shoulders of one person. So when you're going to build a program, it's important, obviously, to have the approval of the administration so that you can get going, but also to have these additional layers of support through your faculty, your staff, the student body of the university, and the community as a whole. And when you're going to get the support of these folks, it's really important to understand who you're talking to. So you need to answer their questions and get their support based on the way that they receive information. So some of the members of this particular audience are going to want facts and data. Why should we do this? How is it going to work? Give me facts and figures and data. Telling stories of the social impact or how incredibly life-changing this program is going to be isn't going to be impactful for those folks. They're going to want the data, and you need to know what is the answer to that question that's going to feed them so that you can gain their support. At the same time, somebody in the same position could be really impacted by the social stories, by the stories of success, by the stories of someone's life that you really can't tell with the numbers and data and figures. So you really need to know your audience to win these folks over. And the thing is, we have all of that. We have data that says this works. We also have stories that says this works. So you're not trying to skew any sort of information so that it works to the person that you're talking to. What you're trying to do is figure out, how does this person learn? Just like we do with students, how does this person learn? How can I get the information in the way that's going to be most impactful to help this administrator or this faculty member understand the importance of the work that we're doing and why we need to get it done? So understanding your audience when you're building that level of support, it's really, really important to speak the language that they're speaking to you. We have the info, you just need to make sure that you're giving it to them in the way that they can understand. Another thing to keep in mind when you're building that support across your university is to remember what is important to the university. Obviously, everybody wants to educate students, but looking at the mission and the vision of your university, every university is required to have a mission statement. Most universities have core purposes, core reasons, core values for the way that they do things. I've put a couple of examples on this slides from different universities that I've worked with, but you can see by the work that we do, working with students that learn differently, you can see how creating an equal access to education already meets the values, the missions, and the purpose of these universities. That third bullet down says, foster each student's ability to think. Devotion to the intellectual, ethical, and social development of students. So the words that the universities already using to define their purpose are the exact same words that we are using when we're creating these programs. So if you're new to starting a program, if you're still trying to build that support around your program, keep in mind who your audience is, and keep in mind what is already identified as that university as important to them. The last bullet says accreditation goals. Every university is always looking at accreditation goals. So post-secondary programs do have accreditation standards that we want to keep in mind as we're developing our programs, but also take a look at what your university accreditation standards are. One of the key points in the creation of the REACH program, where I started, was the fact that the College of Charleston had been dinged on their accreditation process for lack of diversity. And the president at the time, George Benson, had the wherewithal to realize including students with disabilities is a way to expand the level of diversity at our university. So it wasn't necessarily the social justice or the social impact that opened the door at the College of Charleston. It was a recognition that diversity is a level, that disability is a level of diversity that was missing at the university. And so because of that ding in the accreditation standards, that sort of opened the door for us. So being aware of what is important to your university and how what we do aligns with what they've already identified as important to them is a really key factor in gaining support through your university. Another thing to be very mindful of when you're building a program is to answer the questions before they even ask them. When you talk about disability, I'm sure so many of you have already had this experience. People don't want to talk about disability. They always say at dinner parties, don't talk about religion and politics. That's fine. People do not want to talk about disability because they're so worried about offending somebody or saying the wrong thing. So people tend to not say anything. So sometimes you've really got to be aware of what are the questions that they want to ask. Why are they giving me this no? And come up with the answer so that they don't even have to ask the question. I put on this slide a couple of bullets of the things that I have sort of figured out people don't want to ask, like liability. People are so afraid of somebody getting hurt. Well, we did a liability study at the college before we started our program, and they found that students that were international transfer students had a much higher level of liability than students with disabilities. So we were able to answer that question. But trying to figure out what are those unasked questions that's stopping people from saying yes and participating in programs is really, really important. And when you're doing that, you're probably going to come across some of those fears that people have. And sometimes the discrimination that people have. And I really do think that discrimination really comes from a lack of knowing. So when you put that information out there beforehand, people don't have to ask the question. Then they're not silently sitting there and just saying no. But if you can figure out what their resistance is and go ahead and throw that question out there before they even ask. You really do need to gather your allies. When I was starting a program, I would walk into one office and say, hi, I'm Edie. I'm here. I'm starting this program. And people just assumed that I knew everybody that was ever born with a disability. So they would say, oh, you must know Professor so-and-so because her daughter has Down syndrome. And I would just write down, oh, yeah, sure. I don't know this professor, but now I've got somebody who is potentially an ally. So I would go over to that professor and say, hey, we're starting this program. And then that professor would pull in their friend. And then that professor's friend would pull in another. So you start to sort of grassroots gain the support across the university. And a lot of other people just want someone else to start it. And once you get started, then they'll jump in. But sort of figuring out who your allies is a really important piece, because people will talk to someone else about the program instead of talking to you because you're the one that's bringing it to the university. Or people don't want to talk to that professor whose child has a disability because they're afraid, again, to say anything. So they don't say anything at all. So once you've expanded beyond just yourself and those couple professors, and those professors have them brought in their friends, then you sort of have this base knowledge. When I started the program, I started with about 6 people that were really supportive. When I left 13 years later, I had trained over 500 professors, and that doesn't even include the number of different staff members at the college that had gone through training, so that it was a campus-wide. But I really did just start with about 6 people on campus that were supportive of the program. The other thing that you want to do when you're creating a program is make sure that you are building a sustainable process. You don't want your program to be so dependent on you that when you leave, your entire program falls apart. When I started the program that I started, my plan was to be there just for 4 years so I could start the program, get it through the 4 years, and go back to the classroom because I love teaching and I love being with students. But I knew at that point that it was still too dependent on me. When I retired and left the college, I knew that the program was in good hands. It was in no way dependent on me for its survival. So when I was creating processes, different departments were in charge of their piece. So residence life was in charge of putting students in housing. Academic advising was in charge of advising students. Financial aid is the one that spoke with the families about financial aid. The treasurer's office spoke with the families about the bills. I didn't do any of that. So not only was the student's experience inclusive, but so was the processes and the mechanisms that ran the program. So it was completely embedded in the university. And that program is not reliant on one person. It is a system-wide system embedded in the system program, so that when everybody who works at the college right now leaves, that program will remain. So it's a very important piece of making sure that the program is sustainable, because you don't want to do all of this hard work and then it just leaves when you leave. So training. I am a big proponent of training people. It's not that working with people with disabilities is so difficult that we need training. What the training is really getting people to understand that we are including a new group of people. And so this is the new group of people. It's just like there's a university in my town that went from being just males to including females. And so there were some trainings in how do we expand our processes to include this new demographic of people. It's not because people with disabilities are so hard to deal with. They're not. They're just other people that fit within another dynamic. There are some people that are going to need some training. Key on the list, I think, is professors. One of the things that I learned when I started working at the university level is so many professors are experts in their field, but they really haven't had a lot of instruction on how to teach. So when we say including students with disabilities in class is just really good teaching, we're saying that sometimes to an audience that doesn't really have any background in teaching. Like I said before, I trained over 500 professors at the university where I worked, and then I worked with so many universities across the country doing training for professors. And 99% of the time, everybody's very open to that instruction. And a lot of times the training that I would provide for professors was really validating for professors because they wanted to know that they were doing a good job. So a lot of that training really validated the things that they were already doing in class. I'm going to talk about mentors and tutors and internships a little in just a little bit. What information to share? It is very important, I feel, that your university is that your program is reflective of your university. So I can tell you day by day exactly what we did when I was at the college. But if that's not how your university works, it's not going to make sense in your university. So the information that you're going to share with your university is the way that you're making your program embed into what works. So if you don't have a residential component to your university, it would not make sense for your program to have a residential component. Or if you are at a 2-year university, it wouldn't make sense for you to have a 4-year program. So you need to make sure that the information that you're sharing is specific to your program and specific to your home at your university. The last bullet there says, watch your language. I say this to everybody, whether I'm working with middle schools, high schools, graduate, or employment states. We tend to hang on to the population of student that we work with and say, my students, the students that are in our program. But the thing is, they're the university students. So when you say our students, you're taking ownership of them and taking it away from the professors. So the students that were in the program that I worked with, we called them the students. We didn't call them our students. We didn't call them reach students. We just called them students. So it's really careful that you don't take ownership of the students by the language that you're using. My favorite thing to call them is students. If you separate them with language, you may unintentionally separate them from the rest of the student body by just using those words. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the program that I ran, just as sort of a model. Most of this is the program that I ran with a few things thrown in that I helped some other universities develop along the way. But the most important piece of the program that I created was that it was dedicated to the principles of inclusion and self-determination. We wanted students to be completely included in the university and in the community, because if we separate students with disabilities from everyday life, when they graduate, what have we prepared them for? We want students prepared to go into the world as it is and to be able to be successful within that world. The other piece of that is self-determination. I never at any point want to take away someone's right to express their own desires and interest for their own life. So that piece of self-determination was woven through everything that we did in the program that I worked on. The program that I worked on that I'm going to go through real quick with you was a 4-year program. It was at a 4-year university. It was a non-degreed program, and it was designed for students with mild to moderate intellectual disabilities. We did have students with some other diagnoses, like we had students with autism, but they did have to function as though they had a mild to moderate intellectual disability. So if they had autism, that means their academics, their socialization, and their independent living skills all had to be impacted. And we also had some students with some traumatic brain injury, but all their functional levels were within that range of mild to moderate intellectual disabilities. And the students in the program had access to every piece of academics, socialization that every traditional student had. It took time. It wasn't until the last year that I was there that we were able to develop the study abroad piece. But by the time I left, the students in the program had the exact same access that traditional students had to every piece of education at the university. So like most programs, the concentration of the program that I created was academics, social, independent, and career development, which is very reflective of what you're going to see on an IEP for a student that has hit that age of transition. So for the parents that are out there, this should look familiar. The program was based on the ideals of what an IEP is preparing students for in the future. So just a quick look at each area. Independent living, the program that I developed did have a housing component. The College of Charleston has a lot of students that live on campus, so it was really important that I created a living community as well on the campus because that is what traditional students experience. The way that it was set up was that when students first came to campus that freshman year, the freshmen in this program would live together in a living learning community with graduate and undergraduate students that were there to provide support after hours when the staff was not there. The students lived in double rooms. So there were 2 students from the program in a room together in a suite of 2 or 3 rooms. And so we had 3 or 4 apartments each year where our students were living with that support their freshman year. After their freshman year, they were free to live wherever they wanted to live on campus with whomever they wanted to. But we did take that first year to teach them some strategies about living on their own. A lot of it was time management. A lot of it was hygiene. One of the things that a lot of families, students didn't realize was the amount of dependency that students have on the structure of their family unit when it comes to independent living. So a lot of families really thought that the student was independent at getting up in the morning, getting themselves breakfast, getting themselves off to school. But that was just sort of the structure of the family. This happens to students without disabilities as well. When your whole family gets up at 6 o'clock and the whole family is eating breakfast and everybody piles in the car, and everybody gets dropped off at their various school or work site, you don't really realize that the student may not be independent in this process. They're very dependent on that family structure. So when students would come to campus, we had the opportunity to see what is a level of independence and what is a level that needs some additional support and instruction. Time management was a big piece of that. One of the things that really annoys me about the world is that we've all gone to digital clocks. I miss those old clocks where you could actually show we have 10 minutes left until you need to leave, because so many students come to campus and they say, I have class at 10 o'clock. It is 10 o'clock, so I'm going to leave my dorm now and head to class. Oh no, you need that transition time. You've got to walk, 10 minutes to get to your class. So all of that time management was a big piece. And all of those activities of daily living of how do you get up, put on clean clothes, feed yourself, get to where you're going. All of those are skills, not only to survive those 4 years at university, but also when you have a job. How do you get yourself up, dressed in what you're supposed to get dressed in, and get yourself to work? So this instruction that's happening in this living learning community freshman year is empowering them for life way after school. So if you're a student who hasn't gone to college yet, or if you're a family, I've put on this slide some bullets of things that you can do to prepare for going away to school. One of the biggest things that I really like to point out, if the student has the opportunity to travel away from the family, either go live with a cousin for a couple of weeks, go to a summer camp. But the first time a student is sleeping away, hopefully isn't when they go to college. We want to try to give students the opportunity to live that experience and gain some independence while they're still at home with their family. It's really important to understand that when students are learning how to be independent, that they're going to make mistakes, and that's fine. What we need to do as supporters is help the student connect that cause and effect. Why were you late? Why did you not have any clean clothes? It's because you didn't wash them, and you have to, give yourself this much time to wash them, or you didn't call the person you needed to call. Mistakes are fine. That is how people learn. So on this slide, there's lots of different examples of how you can prepare yourself for living away from school. The next area is social skill development. Students in the program had social mentors that were assigned to them. They were all one-on-one relationships, and there were no segregated activities that were just created for students that are in the program. The mentors were matched with the students based on common interests, and the mentors could provide feedback for the program staff so that we could develop the social skills. And the students in the program knew that this was happening. It's not like anybody was telling on each other, but it's really hard for students to self-identify their social skill deficits. They may be able to say, we don't seem like friends, or I'm not comfortable in that, but actually identifying what is the skill that needs to be taught is sometimes hard for the student, and it's hard for the mentor. That missing piece of social communication is oftentimes the issue that's really interfering with relationships. So having mentors working with students really helps us and gives us a guide to figure out what do we need to teach this student so that they can have true, genuine, long-lasting, reciprocal relationships, and not a person that's put in your life to provide support for you, but somebody is actually maintaining an ongoing relationship with you. One of the things that I love about the program that I ran is that students' relationships with their mentors turned into friendships that went way beyond graduation, and people were staying in touch for years after they had finished at university. So for families and students out there that are preparing, one of the greatest ways to be prepared for socialization and socialization instruction is to be included in age-appropriate activities. Make sure that anything that's on the IEP that has to do with socialization is age appropriate. So if your student is in 9th grade and their socialization goals on that IEP, know what a traditional 9th grader is doing. If I had to guess what a 9th grader is doing, I'd be way off. I was in 9th grade a seriously long time ago. So talk to another 9th grader at the school. What are you up to? What do you watch? What do you do in your free time? And find out to make sure that the IEP goals, what we're teaching students, is appropriate for their age. Again, allow for mistakes. And be very aware of the role that peers are playing in the students' lives. We don't want there to be one person that's the end all be all. That is the tutor, that is the guide, that is the friend. We don't want that. Most people have a circle of support around them, and we want that same thing for students that have learning challenges as well. It's also important at some point for the student to start to gain an understanding of the way that their disability impacts them. Just like if somebody had diabetes, this person with diabetes would be aware, I have this thing and I need to take care of it, and this is what I need to do. It's the same thing with having an intellectual disability. These are the things that I do in social situations that really get in my way, and this is what I need to work with. I remember I had a student who would talk all of the time. He never took a break from talking. And now, because he's developed an understanding, he can say to people, sometimes I'll just go on and on and on. So after a while, you can just put your hand up and I'll be like, oh, okay, let me take a break. And learning to tell other people to give him this nonverbal cue has really expanded his ability to make friends and to maintain relationships. And all of that was just developing an understanding of the way that his disability was getting in the way of developing those relationships. Career development. So the students that were in the program that I ran did internships every semester. They were 10 hours per week. They were paid for the work that they did, and they would start those internships on campus so that we as a program could really evaluate what level of support do they need, because you never want to give people support they don't need. Could they get there on time? Did they know who to ask for support? Did they come dressed appropriately? And then after that one semester on campus, we would have them go into internships that were in the community. And those internships that they would participate in the community were always related to something that they were interested in doing as a career that they would qualify for. So we never pretended that anybody was going to do something that they wouldn't have the credential for. So the program that I ran was a certificate program. So students would not have a degree. So we couldn't say that they would be teachers because they wouldn't have the credential to be a teacher. So if a student was interested in being a teacher, we would have to look into the field of education, look at the state that they were from, and see what are you actually qualified to do so that when you graduate, you're going to be able to get a job doing that. We did a training for the internship site so that they would give us honest feedback. Again, this is one of those situations where nobody wanted to say anything bad against somebody with a disability, but it's not bad to give feedback. You know, if the only thing you can say about somebody for their employment review is that, you know, they always make everybody smile, but they don't produce any results, then they're not going to be able to keep their job. And that's not mean. It's honest. It's okay to give feedback because students want to learn. We want students to be able to learn and grow. And we need that feedback. So that was a big piece of the training that we did for the internship sites. And like I said, we had a 90% full-time living wage employment rate for the alumni of the program. So for students and parents out there that are interested in trying to figure out how do I prepare for this, one of the things that you can do is work. Get a job, volunteer, do something for somebody so that you are learning how to work, learning how to ask questions when you don't know what to do, learning how to set goals. If they're not going to pay you, it's okay, volunteer. If it's only, you know, cleaning off tables at a restaurant, do the work, put in the time now so you get used to that. And you also sort of build your stamina for work and get used to equitable treatment. There's a lot of students that I've experienced whose parents' friends have given them a job, but there was no expectation at the job. There was no equitable treatment that this person is going to produce work. I believe people can produce work at some level. So make sure there's some responsibility at that job. That just standing there and smiling and waving, it's hard to earn a paycheck doing that. So what else can you do? Everybody can do something. I firmly believe that. And I've seen it over my 33-year career. So let's make sure that we're giving people responsibility. And it's okay to fail because we can learn from those failures, but make sure we're putting students in a place where they have the opportunity to grow and learn. And please make sure that work is age appropriate. We had a student who was so interested in working as a teacher and was going through the process of learning how to work in a preschool, but she wanted to play. She didn't want to take care of the children. She wanted to play with I almost said paper dolls. I didn't have paper dolls, like the bricks or the stacking blocks. And when the children were taking a nap, she wanted to take a nap. So we had to help her understand what was age appropriate for her as an employee. So make sure that you're having those experiences. It'll help prepare you for college. Academics, students in the program that I ran took traditional college courses every semester. I did a training with those professors. I'll tell you a little bit about that in a second. This is a list of some of the classes that students in my program participated in, but we had students take classes in every single school and department on that campus. I'm talking science, foreign language, all of the things that people think are really difficult. We only did have one student take a math class, but we had the one. And it wasn't because the math department was resistant. It was because we didn't really have a lot of students interested in math. But the students would take traditional coursework and we taught the professors, what do you need to do so the student can be in this place where they can learn and grow and be a valuable part of the education. In addition to taking traditional courses, the program that I ran had some additional instruction. I really believe in giving people, you need what you need. And if you don't know how to count money when you arrive, what can we do to teach you how to manage a budget so that when you're on your own, you're able to get your bills paid? Or if you don't understand why you can't make friends within your class, let's provide you some instruction on that. Not necessarily a class on, socialization, but that one-on-one instruction on how you do this. For moms and dads and grandparents and students at home, how are you going to prepare? One of the most important things you can do when you're in high school is to make sure that accommodations and modifications are written purposefully. I've seen so many IEPs that look identical, where every accommodation and modification is the same, but these should be individually based on what the student is doing. I've also seen a ton of accommodations that weren't necessary. I've seen more people getting copies of notes that don't want the copies of notes or don't use the copies of notes. So it's not a meaningful accommodation for them. Or using technology, the student's able to get their own notes. So one day when they have a job, they don't have to ask their boss for a copy of notes. Including another thing I really like to see students do is have some study skill instruction. There's so many kids now that don't know how to study. They don't know how to do anything independently on their own. I'm talking all students in general. But how do you organize your schoolwork? What is studying? Is making flashcards studying, or is using flashcards studying? Can you study by yourself for 30 minutes? Can you study by yourself for 50 minutes? Do you know what to do during that time? So making sure that you have some academic skills and you're developing those academic skills. I find it's very helpful if students have homework when they're in high school. We don't want high school to be a war for the family. Maybe put a time limit on that. High school teachers maybe say, we expect you to do 60 minutes of homework each night at home, things like that. But we will also want to make sure that we're aligning the student with an IEP's education as closely as possible to what a traditional student's education looks like. So if students are changing classes, students with IEP should be changing classes. If they're writing papers, what can the student with the IEP do that's equivalent to what the traditional students are doing? And again, helping the students start to gain an understanding of what their disability is. Disability is not a bad thing. We don't need to keep it a secret. It just is what it is. And the more a student understands about their own disability, the easier it is for them to be able to share what they need with other folks that they come in contact with. So ongoing support for professors, like I said before, sometimes professors need support in including students with diverse learning needs into their classrooms. I'm a big fan of having a meeting with professors at the beginning of the semester. Usually a program staff member will start this process, and as the student goes through the program, the student will eventually be able to take over the role because they'll be able to express to the professors what it is that they need in order to be successful within their classes. What's really important is to establishing a level of rigor so that the student is truly challenged to learn. Nobody should get an A+ for just sitting there. We believe that students can learn. They may not be able to learn as much. They may not be able to learn to the same level of understanding, but they can learn. So establishing what that appropriate level of rigor is and providing support as the professor's learning how to deliver that content is really important. In class, the students will require modifications, which I'll talk about in just a second. But it's also really important to remember that students are protected by FERPA at public universities. So we don't want to announce to the entire class that, the student has a disability, so I'm going to do different things for them. That's not necessary, and we don't want to do that. And we want to be very respectful of the students' right to privacy and their right to participate like everybody else. So how to include for professors that are watching, I love universal design of learning. I'm going to give you the website for that on the next slide, but it really is just good teaching strategies that really doesn't have much to do with disability. It just has to do with great ways of delivering and assessing content and keeping students engaged in your class, disability or not. Scaffolding instruction, diversifying instruction, and a really important piece is having an alternate expectation that you expect students to learn, no matter what their ability level is. What they may be learning is different, but there's still an expectation that students sitting in that classroom are going to learn some content. I'm trying to watch the time. This slide just goes over very briefly what universal design of learning is, which is basically you teach stuff in a variety of different ways. You assess that learning in a variety of different ways. And then there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can keep students engaged in the content. We know the traditional college students' attention span right now is about 1.5 minutes. So all of those tools that are related to engagement is really, really important. The website for Universal Design of Learning has incredible resources on it. It is udlcenter.org. It's very, very important that people have a toolbox. And so this is a really important key piece to that toolbox. Accommodations are those things that universities already provide for students that have diverse learning needs. Most of this is already available through Disability Services Office, or it's very easy for professors to do. The students that have a diverse learning need that are part of a program are going to require modifications. Modifications, unlike accommodations, actually change what the student is required to learn. It's not an alternate learning, it's just the amount of learning or the depth at which the students are learning is going to be changed. This is the key thing. You'll see under my examples that the last piece says remove a piece of curriculum. I usually get a lot of questions about that. What that usually is a piece that's beyond the student's ability to comprehend. And a good example of that is we had a lot of students taking a business class, and part of that business class was building an in-depth budget to run a private company. And so a lot of our students were not able to process the skills needed for that piece. So we would take out that budgeting piece of the curriculum. They were still building their businesses, they were still running their businesses, but we were able to remove that piece, which was fine because it was part of the modification of the course requirements. So modifications require a change to what the student is required to learn. They may learn 5 of the 7 points of the class, or maybe they learn all points of the class, but just to a different level of understanding. And then decision-making and problem solving, so important for developing students that are independent when they graduate. We love that say we want students to be independent and decision makers, but we need to remember that that is a process. Learning how to make a decision is something that needs to be taught. Teaching students to understand choices that they have, identifying what their options are. How do you choose between option A and option B? How do you develop a circle of support when you're making decisions so that you have a variety of folks to choose from? You know, you may want to go to your dad when you are working on your budget, but do you want to go to your dad when you're talking about dating? Or do you want to have somebody else in your circle of support? So it's really important to remember that part of becoming a self-determined person is learning the skills that are part of that. We just can't declare, I am making my own self-determined choice. Self-determination is a skill that needs to be taught, and that's an important piece of post-secondary programs. These are some of the resources that I highly recommend for folks. thinkcollege.net is by far my #1 favorite resource for everybody. I've had the incredible privilege of working with these folks for years and years. They're some of the nicest, most helpful people you're ever going to come across. And what I love about this world is that everybody is working together towards the same goal. So there's no like, I'm not going to tell you my secrets. You know, everybody is more than willing to help and share, and you'll have a hard time finding someone not helpful at Think College. Supporteddecisionmaking.org is also a great resource for teaching the skills that are necessary to teach students to become independent thinkers, to develop those skills around how do you make decisions about your life. It's also a great source when you're trying to steer families away from guardianship. We don't want our students to lose their rights to make decisions about their own life. So supporteddecisionmaking.org is a great resource for there. Peer social skills is designed for students that have autism, but there are so many resources inside of this particular, the Science of Making Friends book, that helps to sort of pinpoint the skills that are missing, because a lot of times in those social skill or those social relationships, it's hard to figure out what's missing. So this book really does sort of lay out bullet by bullet, what are the skills necessary in developing relationships, so you can figure out what is that thing that's missing. It's that sort of undefined, we can't figure out what it is. And then How to Raise an Adult is a great book that I recommend for families. It's actually for everybody raising kids. It's not just for families that have a student with disabilities, but how do you raise a grown-up? How do you put the burden of responsibility onto the student's shoulders so that they can become independent adults? So those are my favorite resources. And then, like I said before, if there's something you wanted me to cover, if you have some questions and we run out of time, because I know I went fairly quickly through a lot of these slides, please feel free to email me directly and I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. So I'm going to stop sharing now and open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Edie. That was fabulous. Do people want to type in questions in the chat and we'll kind of field them? Or raise your hand and go ahead and speak up. You covered a ton of material that was so helpful. I've never seen such a quiet chat box either. I think everybody was just so intent on listening to everything that you had to say. So we are willing to, somebody asked, Claudia asked, are we willing to share a slideshow? And yes, we will be posting it on the MIHEC website. And I can put Edie's email in the chat. So here's a question from Susanna. When can parents start to talk about college to students with disabilities?
Well, I always say keep it on the same time frame that we do for everybody else. So usually I think it's in middle school that schools start talking about college and where to go. A lot of times parents might still have to go to the school and say, hey, guidance counselors that's talking to everybody else about colleges, don't forget my kid too, and share with them the resource. I think college is probably the best resource, but around the same time that everybody else does, to sort of get it on the radar. One of the great things about the timing of when I started my program is that the first few students that I accepted in 2010 were just so grateful that they had an opportunity to go to college that we could have done nothing and they would have been grateful for that experience. But by the time that I left, this field of post-secondary education had expanded so much that the students that were applying were expecting to go to college. From the time that they started in kindergarten, they knew that college was an option. So I would say whenever that starts popping up in your students' education, start the conversation. I would definitely say start looking at universities by sophomore year of high school, because there are so many programs out there now and they are all so incredibly different that you're going to want to make sure that you can whittle it down to a couple and try to go visit those sites in person, because I really think you need to get your feet on a campus so that the student can make a decision that, you know, it could sound great, but if you don't feel at home when you're there, it's just not right. So you may need the opportunity to explore a few. And high schools give days for college visits, so your students should have the same right to those days as well.
Nice. I've noticed that Molly raised her hand. Molly, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, thank you. I thought, oh, well, maybe I'm supposed to write it. I have a question about the residence halls, and you were speaking to your first year students and how you had suites and they had roommates, and you really, I love that idea that that first year you worked and had a very solid plan for that independent living. How did you go about getting your university? Did they like save you rooms, or did you like purchase rooms, or did you have the same amount of dorm rooms every year? How did you go about organizing that and like planning that so that you were prepared?
It was a gradual process. So when I started the program, the College of Charleston has historic homes that they use as residence halls. And so we were given one of those historic homes as a residence hall. And so a lot of my work that first year was just to get traditional students to live in the space so that I could call it inclusive, but we were still very separated by floor. So the next year I got them to move us to a different house where we had other people in it. It was a bigger house. It held 45 people. But my long-term goal was to get them inside a traditional residence hall. So after the second year, when they realized, again, we're just heads in beds. As long as that bed is paid for, it doesn't matter. So as soon as we would accept a student, we would have that student fill out their housing application and pay the deposit. So the only thing our residence life really cared about at that point was that there was a head in that bed and that bed was paid for. So that was a thing where I had to figure out what was important to them so that I could speak their language. They didn't care what program the student was in. All they cared is that the bed was paid for so that they could have a positive bottom line at the end of the day. And then we were at the point where we would say, okay, our freshmen are going to be in this residence hall. We have 10 freshmen, you know, can we please have these rooms because they're more discreet and people don't see us coming in and out. But it was a gradual process to get there.
Thank you. Tammy asks, how does the funding work for initiatives like this? Would the students have the same financial burden as the students without disabilities?
So funding is quite different. It's run university by university. So I've seen many different structures. There is federal financial aid if it's a certified transition program through the federal government. It's not the same level of financial aid that traditional students have, but there is some access there. Some universities have grants where students aren't paying anything. The majority of what I have seen is that students pay traditional tuition plus a program fee. South Carolina, where I am, does have a state legislative scholarship that offsets some of that cost. Some states, students are able to receive some funding through disabilities, special needs offices, some vocational rehabilitation offices, also provide some support. But I would suggest speaking to people that are within your state because they would have the most accurate information for you.
Yeah, I'd like to also just chip in a little bit for Minnesota. If you go to our website for MIHEC, we do have a information 2-page sheet, and on there it talks about the different kinds of financial resources that are available to the students. There's the traditional, as Edie is suggesting, as any college student. If the student is in fact attending a college or university that has that CTP designation through the U.S. Department of Ed. Minnesota has also linked our state financial aid to that CTP designation. So if they are in fact going to a college or university with that, then the Minnesota residents are eligible for a lot of the state financial aid that's available to any college student. So I would encourage you to look at our website for the resource page, as well as the Office of Higher Education has a lot of information on financial aid there as well.
I also know that Think College did a webinar, I think about a year ago, about how to pay for college, and they usually keep those webinars posted on their website.
Yeah. I see Brian Reynolds has his hand raised for asking a question.
I do, thank you. So I'm new to the role at my college. I'm an advisor and also the accessibility and disability coordinator. And so one thing that you talked about that I'm a little nervous about and kind of what we can do is the modifications of classes. We do a lot as far as accommodations, but how do we make sure that we don't modify a class so much that we are affecting the rigor of the course for students that are going to get a degree?
Right. So a lot of that's going to depend upon the structure of your program. Sorry, it popped up on my screen and threw me off. So in the programs that I've worked with, the students are not getting a bachelor's degree. So modifying the coursework for that individual student, the most important thing was to make sure that we're providing a level of rigor where the student was able to learn. But no matter the structure of the program, the integrity of the course is not touched by having students with disabilities participate in the class. If you walk into any class at the college, it would look exactly the same whether or not there was a student from the program in the class. The modifications are based on the individual student work. So they might be doing, instead of a 20-page paper with 5 sources, they might be doing a 4-page paper with 1 source that was provided to them. Everybody else in the class doesn't even know that this modification has been made for the student. So maybe if somebody was, doing the historical analysis of a structure, maybe the one student from the program was just doing a simple record search and printing that out and turning that in. So the modification that the student from the program is going to get isn't even going to be known to everybody else in the class. And the integrity of the course is not touched. And when I did professor training, that was the first thing that I would say when professors came and sat down, because I think it's a very true concern for everyone, because there is value to that bachelor's degree. There's value to a modified curriculum too, but not everybody signed up for that modified curriculum. So it's important to make sure that everybody knows they are truly getting the education that is intended for each of them.
Thank you.
And I also think you bring up a really important example of the question that people are afraid to ask. And I think one of the biggest questions that professors have is, how do I make sure that everybody else is getting what they need to get as well? So thank you for asking that question that most people won't ask.
Well, because I know here, anybody that attends our school, they're here to get a degree. We don't really have students that are here just for that college experience. And so I think that's why I'm concerned about modifying a course so much that, and I hate to say it, but I guess I'll just say it, that they're getting the same degree that someone that didn't have the modifications is going to get. Like you said, there is a value to that degree. So making sure that the rigor is still there for them. So I think that's what I'm concerned of.
Right. So that I think that's more a specific question, which I'd be happy to chat with you about. But we're running out of time. But there's
Sure.
definitely programs that are set up where students are getting degrees. It's just a program that I worked with. They did not get a degree. So my answer is a little bit different. But I'm happy to chat with you about that later. Just grab my email and we can set up a time to chat.
Sure.
Here's maybe we could take one more question. We've got Cindy typed in a question in the chat about how do you handle inclusive sexuality and relationship education for the students. We struggle with this for typical students. How is it handled for students with disabilities? We want to make sure that everyone is safe from victimization. And then after we answer this question, we'll probably end the formal part of the presentation, and then people can stay for an additional discussion.
So it's such an important piece of the education. Definitely, this is a victimized population, so we want to make sure that they have instruction and understand what's going on, how to protect themselves, but also this age of student that we're working with, they are very, 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 very interested in this topic. So what I did with the program where I was working, we had students divided into groups based on their interest level, based on their experience level, so that we could provide them direct instruction. We actually had social workers as part of our staff. They worked as support coordinators, but their credential was social work, so they had training. We had a member of our staff was very interested in sex education and went for a certification in that area. I know there is somebody that works at Think College who has a certification in sex ed that's able to provide resource, but direct instruction is very important. I think a lot of people have this idea that if you don't talk about it, it won't happen. And I think that's just putting on blinders, because not only can students be victimized, but they also have an interest. And so if they want to be independent, self-determined adults, then we have a responsibility to provide them with an education so that they can make informed decisions. So we chose to do it in one-on-one and small group instruction. But no matter how you handle it, it's a very important piece of the education.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your presentation, and to everybody for attending. If you haven't had a chance fill out the poll. That's still available. We'd love to get your feedback. And then we will end the formal time for this presentation, but we will go on for another 15 minutes or so and just have a more of a low-key casual discussion, ask Edie some more questions and take it from there. So thank you all so much for attending.